As Dr. Richards continued to speak, the students were shown more footage, images of devastating wars between nations, entire civilizations falling apart, only to be rebuilt by the very people who had destroyed them. Zorath watched in disbelief as humans fought, not for land or power, but to protect something they had created, something worth fighting for. The historian spoke of the human spirit, how, despite the constant wars, humanity never truly gave up. "We were torn apart by our own violence," he said softly. "But we always came back, stronger than before." Zorath felt a deep sense of awe for the resilience of the human race. But it was more than that. There was something deeper in their history, a story of survival that transcended the horrors of war. As the group sat in silence, processing the images and words they had witnessed, Zorath realized one thing. Earth was not a death world simply because of the violence it had endured. It was a death world because, despite everything, humanity had chosen to live, to fight, and to rebuild, no matter the cost. And that, he understood now, was both Earth's greatest strength and its greatest mystery. The first lesson had been taught. The alien students, though confused and overwhelmed, now understood that Earth's true power wasn't just in its history of destruction. It was in the incredible will to survive and to grow, no matter the odds. Zorath couldn't help but wonder what other truths this planet held. What more would he learn about the species that had survived so much? And more importantly, what would he and his fellow students do with this knowledge once they returned to their own worlds? The journey had just begun. The truth of Earth's resilience. The alien students sat in stunned silence, processing the powerful images and stories they had just witnessed. Zorath, the young student from Xylon, couldn't shake the overwhelming emotions that had stirred inside him. His mind raced with questions about Earth's people, their wars, and their relentless spirit to rebuild after every disaster. Dr. Richards, sensing the weight of their thoughts, stood up and gestured toward the next holographic display. The room was dim, and the flickering lights from the projection screens cast a surreal glow over the students' faces. The history of Earth, so far, had been a tale of destruction, but Dr. Richards was about to reveal something that no one could have predicted. "As you have seen, humanity's past is stained with conflict," Dr. Richards began, his voice steady. "But the real story lies in what came after. The real story is about what humans did when they realized they couldn't survive by destroying each other." Zorath leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. He had always believed that the key to a species' survival lay in its ability to conquer, to fight, and to dominate. The idea that humans, after all their wars, could turn away from destruction was difficult to comprehend. But here, in front of him, was the proof that he had been wrong. The new images on the screen were unlike the violent ones they had seen before. Now the students saw humans coming together, rebuilding what was broken, creating new cities from the ashes of the old. The footage showed people working hand in hand, regardless of their background, to restore what was lost in the chaos. Entire nations, once divided by hatred, were now focused on creating a future where cooperation, not war, was the foundation. Dr. Richards continued. After centuries of war, humanity reached a tipping point. They realized that their true strength wasn't in their weapons, but in their unity. And so they decided to work together to heal their planet. The alien students exchanged glances, astonished by what they were seeing. Zorath's mind was still struggling to make sense of the idea. But how did they do it? Zorath finally asked, his voice filled with wonder. How did they change? Dr. Richards smiled softly, as if he had been waiting for that question. The change came with understanding. Humans realized that they could not continue to fight among themselves if they wanted to survive. They had to look beyond their differences, beyond their history of violence, and focus on what truly mattered, their future. The arrival of the alien students. The sleek, silver ships hovered above Earth's surface, casting long shadows on the ground below. The air crackled with anticipation as the alien students peered out of their windows. They had traveled light years to reach this strange planet, a place that had captured the attention of many across the galaxy. Earth, the so-called Death World, was a mystery. Stories about it had spread throughout the cosmos, mostly filled with fear and awe. Today, these students would uncover the truth. Among them was Zorath, a young alien from the planet Cylon, known for its peaceful inhabitants and advanced technology. Zorath's species had never seen a war, let alone experienced the kind of violence that Earth was rumored to have. He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as the ship descended toward the surface. What kind of creatures would they find here? How could a planet like Earth, which was said to have survived countless wars, still stand? The question swirled in his mind. The ship touched down softly on Earth's soil, and the doors hissed open. A strange, warm breeze greeted them. Zorath stepped onto the ground, his boots crunching against the dirt. The landscape before him was far from what he had imagined. The stories of cities in ruins, of endless destruction, were not what he saw now. Instead, he saw green fields, tall trees, and a sky that stretched out endlessly, almost as if mocking the rumors of war and chaos. The group of students stood in awe, their eyes scanning their surroundings. They were met by a human guide, a historian named Dr. Richards, who had been chosen to show them the true history of Earth. His eyes were kind, but there was something else there too, something hidden behind his glasses. The alien students couldn't place it, but Zorath noticed it immediately. There was a heaviness in Dr. Richards' expression, as if the weight of humanity's history rested on his shoulders. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Richards said with a gentle smile. "I'm sure you have many questions, but let's start with the most important one. What do you think of our planet so far?" Zorath was the first to speak. "I expected to see destruction," he said carefully. "But this is not what I imagined." Dr. Richards' smile faded slightly. "That's the first misconception people have about Earth. What you see now is the result of humanity's determination to rebuild, to survive. But the truth of our past is darker. It's a history written in blood, survival, and sacrifice." The students exchanged uneasy glances. They had been told Earth was a death world, a place where life fought to survive. They had been warned that Earth's history was filled with unimaginable violence and war. But standing on the planet now, with its calm skies and peaceful atmosphere, they couldn't understand how such a place could be labeled a death world. Dr. Richards led them to a small building nearby, which was filled with holographic displays of Earth's history. Zorath's eyes widened as he saw the images flash before him. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. There were images of massive storms, cities that were nothing but crumbling ruins, and landscapes torn apart by forces beyond imagination. He felt a chill run down his spine. The images of war were disturbing, but there was something about them that made him uneasy, something more than just the violence. "Humanity has been at war for centuries," Dr. Richards began, his voice steady, but filled with a quiet sadness. "From the earliest days, we fought over land, over resources, over ideologies. It was in our nature to conquer, to survive, and sometimes to destroy." The alien students listened closely, absorbing every word. Zorath's mind raced. He had heard of wars, but never on this scale. How could a species survive such devastation? How could they rebuild every time their world was torn apart? Dr. Richards paused, letting the silence hang in the air. But there was something about humanity, something that kept us going. It wasn't just our ability to fight. It was our ability to adapt, to learn, and to overcome. And when we were on the brink of annihilation, we made a choice to stop fighting each other and to fight for something greater. Zorath and his fellow students looked at each other, confused and intrigued. What could that something greater be? What had Earth discovered that allowed it to survive and rise again, time after time? As Dr. Richards continued to speak, the students were shown more footage, images of devastating wars between nations, entire civilizations falling apart, only to be rebuilt by the very people who had destroyed them. Zorath watched in disbelief as humans fought, not for land or power, but to protect something they had created, something worth fighting for. The historian spoke of the human spirit, how, despite the constant wars, humanity never truly gave up. "We were torn apart by our own violence," he said softly, "but we always came back, stronger than before." Zorath felt a deep sense of awe for the resilience of the human race, but it was more than that. There was something deeper in their history, a story of survival that transcended the horrors of war. As the group sat in silence, processing the images and words they had witnessed, Zorath realized one thing. Earth was not a death world simply because of the violence it had endured. It was a death world because, despite everything, humanity had chosen to live, to fight, and to rebuild, no matter the cost. And that, he understood now, was both Earth's greatest strength and its greatest mystery. The first lesson had been taught. The alien students, though confused and overwhelmed, now understood that Earth's true power wasn't just in its history of destruction. It was in the incredible will to survive and to grow, no matter the odds. Zorath couldn't help but wonder what other truths this planet held. What more would he learn about the species that had survived so much? And, more importantly, what would he and his fellow students do with this knowledge once they returned to their own worlds? The journey had just begun. The truth of Earth's resilience. The alien students sat in stunned silence, processing the powerful images and stories they had just witnessed. Zorath, the young student from Xylon, couldn't shake the overwhelming emotions that had stirred inside him. His mind raced with questions about Earth's people, their wars, and their relentless spirit to rebuild after every disaster. Dr. Richards, sensing the weight of their thoughts, stood up and gestured toward the next holographic display. The room was dim, and the flickering lights from the projection screens cast a surreal glow over the students' faces. The history of Earth, so far, had been a tale of destruction, but Dr. Richards was about to reveal something that no one could have predicted. "As you have seen, humanity's past is stained with conflict," Dr. Richards began, his voice steady. "But the real story lies in what came after. The real story is about what humans did when they realized they couldn't survive by destroying each other." Zorath leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. He had always believed that the key to a species' survival lay in its ability to conquer, to fight, and to dominate. The idea that humans, after all their wars, could turn away from destruction was difficult to comprehend. But here, in front of him, was the proof that he had been wrong. The new images on the screen were unlike the violent ones they had seen before. Now the students saw humans coming together, rebuilding what was broken, creating new cities from the ashes of the old. The footage showed people working hand in hand, regardless of their background, to restore what was lost in the chaos. Entire nations, once divided by hatred, were now focused on creating a future where cooperation, not war, was the foundation. Dr. Richards continued. After centuries of war, humanity reached a tipping point. They realized that their true strength wasn't in their weapons, but in their unity. And so, they decided to work together to heal their planet. The alien students exchanged glances, astonished by what they were seeing. Zorath's mind was still struggling to make sense of the idea. But how did they do it? Zorath finally asked, his voice filled with wonder. How did they change? Dr. Richards smiled softly, as if he had been waiting for that question. The change came with understanding. Humans realized that they could not continue to fight among themselves if they wanted to survive. They had to look beyond their differences, beyond their history of violence, and focus on what truly mattered, their future. The students listened intently as Dr. Richards spoke of the turning point in Earth's history. He explained how, after the Great Wars, humans had come together to form global alliances, working toward common goals, eradicating poverty, saving the environment, and advancing knowledge. They had created technology that helped them communicate across vast distances, share knowledge, and solve problems together. The unity that had once seemed impossible was now becoming a reality. "This is the real Earth," Dr. Richards said. "It is a world where even the darkest chapters of history didn't destroy hope. Instead, they taught humanity the value of cooperation, the strength found in togetherness, and the power of second chances." Zorath was in awe. The images of humans rebuilding their world were far from what he had expected. He had imagined a species too caught in their violent past to change. But now he was seeing the opposite. Humans had endured unimaginable hardships, yet they hadn't allowed those hardships to define them. They had learned from their past mistakes and had chosen to build a better future, not just for themselves, but for their entire planet. One of the other students, a quiet alien named Vera from the planet Orith, spoke up. "So, humans, they didn't just survive the war. They chose to build something better. But how?" Dr. Richards nodded, acknowledging the question. "Yes, Vera. It wasn't easy. It took time. But humanity realized that survival meant more than just defeating enemies. It meant working together to overcome the challenges they faced, together. And through that, they created a new kind of strength, a strength that isn't found in weapons or armies, but in the hearts and minds of those who believe in something greater than themselves." The alien students absorbed these words with quiet reverence. They had expected Earth to be a place of destruction, a world that had been shaped only by war. But now, they were beginning to understand that the true strength of Earth didn't lie in its past, but in its future. The planet had faced unimaginable destruction, but instead of falling apart, humans had risen from the ashes, determined to create a world where peace and cooperation could thrive. Zorath couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the humans he had come to study. What had they learned that his people could not? What was it that allowed them to rise above the violence of their past, while so many other species had fallen into despair? He realized that Earth had something unique, something powerful, and it was this strength that had allowed them to overcome their darkest days. As the group moved on to the next room, Zorath's mind was racing. He had thought that the story of Earth was one of endless conflict, but now he saw that the true story was far more complex. It was a story of resilience, hope, and a relentless will to live. And that, Zorath realized, was the real strength of humanity. The journey of discovery was just beginning for these alien students. What other truths about Earth would they uncover? And more importantly, what lessons would they carry back to their own worlds, where peace and unity seemed like distant dreams? For now, Zorath could only wonder as they moved deeper into the heart of Earth's history. The legacy of human determination. As the students continued their exploration, the holographic screens shifted once again, unveiling a new chapter in humanity's journey, one of immense hardship but also unyielding determination. The room was filled with the images of Earth's recovery after the Great Wars. They saw devastated cities, burned forests, and poisoned rivers, but what followed was even more astonishing. "Look closely," Dr. Richards said, his voice low and steady. "What you are about to witness is the true legacy of humanity." The students could hardly believe their eyes. Despite the carnage left behind by humanity's wars, the people of Earth did not give up. They didn't simply rebuild their cities, they reshaped their entire way of life. They understood that in order to avoid repeating the same mistakes, they needed to change their systems, their beliefs, and their priorities. The focus shifted from weapons and destruction to peace and cooperation. The images displayed on the screen now showed people from all walks of life working together, cleaning up the environment, planting trees, rebuilding infrastructure, and creating sustainable energy sources. This wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about creating something new, something better. It was a collective effort, one that spanned across continents, and the results were undeniable. Zorath couldn't believe what he was seeing. The alien students who had studied war and conflict in their own worlds had never encountered a species that responded to destruction with such resilience and hope. The typical response to catastrophe was survival, focusing on rebuilding what had been lost and securing one's own future. But humans had done something different. They had turned their survival instinct into a shared purpose for the greater good of all. Humans, Dr. Richards continued, understood that their survival depended not just on their ability to rebuild their cities or their technologies, but on their capacity to heal their society. After the wars, they realized they had to let go of old divisions. They had to trust one another again. The students watched as images flashed before them, evidence of humans putting aside centuries of hatred, distrust, and prejudice. The political divisions that had once torn the planet apart were now being mended, and the environmental disasters caused by overexploitation of resources were being reversed. They saw humanity's remarkable ability to work together, transcending national borders and cultural differences, to restore a sense of unity. Zorath had always been taught that a species' strength came from its military power, its ability to dominate and defeat its enemies. But the history of Earth challenged that belief. The human spirit, Zorath realized, wasn't one that thrived on conquering others. It thrived on healing, on coming together in the face of overwhelming odds. This idea was foreign to him. His people had never even considered that a species could achieve such peace after war, let alone do so on a global scale. Could it really be this simple? Vyra, the student from Orith, whispered in disbelief. Humans chose peace over war. Dr. Richards nodded. Yes, they chose peace because they had seen the devastating consequences of war. They knew that war could only lead to further destruction, to endless cycles of violence that never truly solved anything. They made the conscious decision to break that cycle. The other students remained quiet, processing the magnitude of what they were learning. Zorath's mind was racing. If his own people could learn this lesson, could they too find a way to embrace peace and unity? Could they stop their constant battles, their endless cycle of warfare and conflict, and start rebuilding their world the way humans had? I don't understand, Zorath said, his voice tinged with confusion. If war was so destructive, why didn't other species learn the same lesson as Earth? Dr. Richards smiled gently. Every species has its own path, Zorath. Some learn from their mistakes, some repeat them. The key to humanity's success was their ability to accept responsibility for their actions and to learn from their past. They had to face their darkest moments and decide that they wouldn't let their history define their future. The students were beginning to grasp the depth of the message Dr. Richards was sharing with them. Earth's recovery wasn't just about rebuilding cities or making technological advancements. It was about creating a new mindset, one that valued cooperation over conquest. The human spirit wasn't defined by its ability to fight, but by its capacity to come together after suffering and create something better. This was the true lesson of humanity's war-torn past. Zorath's heart stirred with a newfound respect for humans. He had thought them to be a species consumed by their own destructive nature, always at war with one another. But now he was beginning to see that their true strength lay in their resilience, in their ability to learn from their mistakes, and to rebuild not just their world, but their entire way of life. This, Zorath said quietly, this is what makes Earth different. This is why humans have survived. Dr. Richards nodded once again, his gaze fixed on the group of alien students. Exactly. They survived not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, but because they understood the power of change. And that is something every species can learn from. The room fell into silence as the students absorbed the profound message. Zorath, still deep in thought, couldn't help but wonder if his own people could ever make such a choice. Could they stop the cycle of war and destruction? Could they choose peace, not as a last resort, but as a way of life? He wasn't sure, but for the first time, he thought it might be possible. As the holographic images flickered off, the alien students stood in contemplation. They had learned something truly extraordinary today, about Earth, about humanity, and about themselves. The journey wasn't over yet, and Zorath couldn't wait to see what they would uncover next. But one thing was certain: Earth's lessons had made an impact, and that impact would resonate with them for the rest of their lives. The shocking truth about humanity's resilience. The alien students sat in the darkened room, the images of Earth's past still lingering in their minds. Zoreth, the inquisitive student from Lorien, stood up from his seat, unable to shake the thoughts racing through his mind. The history of humanity had left him with so many questions, and one in particular gnawed at him. How did they manage to rebuild? Zoreth asked, his voice filled with awe and confusion. After everything that happened, how do humans find the strength to rise again? Dr. Richards, who had been guiding the students through their exploration of Earth's history, didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked over to a console on the side of the room and tapped a few buttons. The holographic display shifted again, showing images of cities reduced to rubble, entire regions left barren and lifeless. But this time, something different appeared. The images weren't just of destruction. They showed human faces, people in the aftermath of war, working tirelessly to rebuild. Zoreth and the other students leaned forward, captivated by the images. They saw humans gathering what little resources they had left, banding together to form small communities. But this wasn't just about survival. It was about something more. There was a sense of hope in their eyes, a determination that was almost otherworldly. These images represent what humans did after the wars, Dr. Richards said, his voice calm yet powerful. While the destruction was vast, humans understood something that most species fail to grasp: resilience. They didn't just want to rebuild the world. They wanted to rebuild themselves. The students exchanged uncertain glances. In their cultures, when faced with a war-torn society, the instinct was to dominate what was left, to seize control of the remnants and assert power. But the humans? They weren't interested in seizing control. They wanted to heal. How did they heal from such devastation? Asked Vera, a student from Yifar, her voice tinged with disbelief. Dr. Richards smiled slightly. They understood the importance of forgiveness, not just of others, but of themselves. It was never easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but they made a conscious choice to break the cycle of revenge. Instead of continuing the endless spiral of war, they chose to rebuild their cultures and societies with cooperation and compassion at their core. Zoreth's mind raced. He had studied numerous civilizations, both peaceful and violent, but none of them had ever responded to war in the way humans had. On his planet, the immediate aftermath of conflict was always filled with grudges, hatred, and the desire to strike back. To forgive was seen as weakness, and rebuilding meant preparing for the next war. But humanity had done something different. They chose peace not just as a temporary measure, but as a permanent path forward. But Zoreth hesitated, struggling to understand. How could they trust each other again, after everything they had done to each other? Dr. Richards looked at him seriously. That's the real power of humanity, Zoreth. They realized that to continue fighting meant to lose everything. They saw the depths of their own destruction and understood that to survive, they needed to rebuild not just their cities, but their relationships with one another. It took time, but slowly, they forged a new identity, one based on mutual respect and shared goals. The alien students listened intently, but Zoreth couldn't shake the skepticism that clouded his mind. Could his people, or any species, really make such a drastic change? To stop fighting, to choose peace in the face of everything they had endured. Was that even possible? The room grew quiet as the holographic images continued to show the faces of humans, young and old, working together, planting trees, fixing buildings, and teaching one another the skills necessary for survival in a new world. There were no signs of greed, no indication of dominance. They were just people working toward a common goal: to create a world worth living in. The students were beginning to realize the true depth of humanity's lesson. The humans had faced their darkest hour, and yet they hadn't turned on each other. Instead, they had chosen to come together, to rebuild not only their world, but the very nature of their society. Do you see now? Dr. Richards asked, his voice steady and full of conviction. This is what makes humanity unique. They survived, not by winning a war or gaining power, but by learning the most important lesson of all. That peace, true peace, is the only way forward. Zorath thought about his own people. On his homeworld, war was seen as a fact of life, an inevitable part of existence. Generations had fought, and generations would continue to fight. But now, in the presence of the human story, Zorath began to wonder, could his species, too, learn this lesson? Could they find a way to stop the endless fighting and instead work toward a future where peace wasn't just a dream, but a reality? The silence in the room was heavy with contemplation. The alien students had been exposed to a truth they had never considered before, that war wasn't the only way. In fact, it might not even be the best way. Maybe, Zorath said softly, maybe we've been wrong all along. Dr. Richards didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the weight of the statement linger in the air. Zorath wasn't sure what the future held for his people, but he knew one thing: they had much to learn from humanity. As the display faded to black, the students sat in deep silence, each processing the immense shift in their thinking. They had seen humanity's darkest hours, but they had also witnessed something even more extraordinary: the power of choice. The power to choose peace, to rebuild, and to change. Zorath could only wonder if his species, or any species, would ever truly understand the strength it took to make that choice. The power of humanity's choice. The alien students sat in a quiet room, the weight of what they had just learned pressing heavily on them. Zorath, still deep in thought, stared at the empty screen in front of him. His mind couldn't stop replaying the images of Earth's history, the wars, the destruction, and, most surprising of all, the humans' ultimate choice to rebuild, not through violence, but through peace. How did they ever come to that decision? Vira's voice broke the silence, her tone still filled with disbelief. After everything, how could they choose to forgive, to rebuild? Dr. Richards, who had been guiding the students through their lessons on Earth's history, stood before them, watching their reactions with quiet satisfaction. He had anticipated their confusion. After all, no species they had studied before had ever taken such a path after such devastation. But the story of humanity was different. The story was about choice. It wasn't easy, Dr. Richards said, his voice steady. Humanity didn't just wake up one day and decide that they wanted peace. It took generations of suffering, of witnessing the damage war could do, before they truly understood that the cycle of violence would lead them nowhere. The students exchanged looks. Zorath's mind was swirling with questions, and he wasn't the only one. On his planet, war was inevitable. There was always a new enemy, a new reason to fight. But humans, they had chosen peace. They had chosen to stop fighting, to rebuild. Was that even possible for them? Humans had to confront something many species don't have to. Dr. Richards continued. They had to realize the true cost of their wars. Not just the destruction of cities or the loss of lives, but the toll it took on their spirits, their communities, and their future. For humans, the turning point came when they realized that, if they continued on this path, there would be no future. They were on the brink of extinction. Zorath couldn't believe what he was hearing. Extinction. The humans had almost destroyed themselves. Yes, Dr. Richards said, as if reading Zorath's thoughts. There was a time, not long ago in their history, when the wars were so brutal, so relentless, that many thought humanity was doomed. But in the darkest of times, they realized that survival didn't mean winning. It meant changing. And so, they did. Change. Vera asked, her voice full of skepticism. But how? How do you change when everything is lost? It started with a simple idea, Dr. Richards replied. The idea that peace wasn't just about the absence of war. It was about healing, about rebuilding trust and relationships. It was about recognizing that every human life had value, and that by working together, they could create something better than what they had before. Zorath thought back to what he had seen in the holograms. The faces of the humans, battered by war, but still full of hope. He had expected to see fear or desperation, but instead, he saw determination. Was that what set humanity apart? Their ability to look beyond their current suffering and imagine a future where peace was possible. Dr. Richards walked over to a console and brought up a new set of images. This time, the display showed human leaders from different parts of the world, shaking hands, working together to create treaties and agreements. Zorath had seen countless displays of power-hungry rulers in his studies, but these humans weren't seeking power. They were seeking unity. They understood, Dr. Richards said, his voice low and reverent, that peace required more than just stopping the fighting. It required building relationships, establishing trust, and healing the wounds left by years of conflict. Zorath felt a surge of admiration. He had never imagined that such a thing could be possible. His people had never known anything but war. The idea of forging peace seemed almost foreign to him. But it wasn't just the leaders, Dr. Richards continued. It was the people, the ordinary citizens, who carried the weight of this change. The soldiers who laid down their weapons, the civilians who helped rebuild the broken cities, the farmers who planted crops to feed their families and neighbors. They all played a part in what we now know as the human renaissance. It wasn't just about surviving the war. It was about creating a new way to live. Zorath's mind was buzzing. Could this really be true? Could a species truly make a choice for peace after so much destruction? He had never seen anything like it in his own galaxy. Every conflict, every war, always ended in more conflict. But the humans, they had chosen something different. They had chosen to heal, to rebuild, and to thrive. Humanity has faced their darkest days, Dr. Richards said, his voice filled with pride. But they rose from the ashes, not by conquering their enemies, but by conquering themselves. By choosing peace, they've created a future that is not just for them, but for the generations to come. The room fell silent as the students processed what they had learned. Zorath's thoughts were racing. If humanity could do this, could his own people ever follow such a path? Could the galaxy as a whole learn to choose peace over war? The holograms faded away, leaving only the students in the room with their thoughts. Zorath felt a shift within him, a new understanding of what peace could truly mean. For the first time, he wondered if it might be possible, not just for Earth, but for all the species of the galaxy. The power of humanity's choice to rebuild, to forgive, and to work toward a better future wasn't just a story. It was a lesson, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was a lesson the rest of the galaxy needed to learn. As the students sat in silence, Zorath couldn't help but think of the future. A future where peace wasn't just a dream. A future where it was a choice. The unseen cost of war. Zorath paced back and forth in the quiet, dimly lit room, his thoughts tangled like a web. The weight of everything they had learned about Earth's violent past and its subsequent transformation weighed heavily on him. The humans had fought wars that nearly destroyed them. Yet they had chosen peace, an act that had not been easy but, instead, required immense sacrifice and reflection. It was a concept Zorath struggled to fully grasp. The alien students had seen the images of devastation on Earth, from cities reduced to rubble to the millions who had perished in the conflict. But the more they learned, the more Zorath realized that the true cost of war was not only in the bodies lost, but in the very soul of a civilization. The mental toll, the endless cycle of grief, hatred, and distrust. Those were the scars that remained long after the fighting ended. Can you imagine what it must have felt like? Vyra's voice broke through Zorath's thoughts, her voice tinged with awe and disbelief. To look around and see everything you've ever known destroyed, and then to make the choice to rebuild instead of seeking revenge. Zorath stopped pacing and turned toward her. He had been thinking the same thing, but hearing it aloud made it more real. The humans had faced devastation on a scale no one could truly understand. But in the end, they chose to rebuild. They chose to heal instead of destroy. How? It's hard to believe, Zorath admitted. After all the violence, how did they stop? How did they choose peace when everything was falling apart around them? Dr. Richards, who had been silently observing their conversation, stepped forward. That's the question, isn't it? How did humanity find the strength to stop? The answer, I believe, lies in something more profound than mere survival. It lies in the very core of what makes them human. Their resilience. Zorath felt a pang of doubt. Resilience. What did that mean, really? For his people, resilience was about enduring, about surviving no matter the cost. But humans, they didn't just survive. They built. They created. They healed. It was a different kind of resilience. Dr. Richards continued. The wars they fought were long and brutal. They lost everything: homes, families, even their sense of security. But it wasn't just about fighting to win. It was about the hope for something better. Humans learned the hard way that the cost of victory could be too great, even for the victors. They understood that peace was not just the absence of war, but a conscious effort to heal the wounds that war left behind. Vira's eyes narrowed. But how did they heal? How did they come to realize that peace was the answer? The first step was understanding the true cost of war, Dr. Richards replied. The destruction, the loss of life, the irreversible damage done to the planet itself. But more than that, they realized something essential, that in the long run, violence breeds more violence. Revenge only leads to further suffering, creating an endless cycle. Humans saw that if they didn't break that cycle, they would destroy themselves. Zorath had heard of cycles of conflict before, but never one that had been so deeply ingrained. It was one thing to wage a war for survival, but to break that pattern voluntarily without outside influence. That was unheard of in his own galaxy. He thought of the warriors in his own world, the pride in their eyes as they prepared for battle. Fighting, conquering, it was seen as a noble thing. But humanity's story was different. They had been at the brink of their own destruction and still chose a path of reconciliation. Humans had to confront their darkest instincts, Dr. Richards continued, and they realized that to truly protect their future, they had to evolve. They had to find a way to live together, to trust one another again. It wasn't easy. Many resisted the change, and some still do. But in the end, humanity chose to rebuild, not by conquering, but by understanding. By forging a new path, one that was based not on dominance, but on cooperation. Zorath couldn't help but admire what the humans had done. It wasn't just that they had survived. It was that they had chosen to be better. But it had come at a price. Peace hadn't been handed to them. They had fought for it, not with weapons, but with their hearts and minds. They had fought the urge for revenge, and in doing so, had saved themselves from total annihilation. Is it really possible for our people to learn this? Zorath asked, almost to himself. Could we choose peace the way humans did? Dr. Richards smiled gently. It's not easy, Zorath. There's no simple answer, but the fact that you're asking the question shows you're ready to understand. Maybe that's the first step. The weight of the question hung in the air. Could the galaxy learn from Earth's history? Could the endless cycle of war be broken? Zorath wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. Humanity had found something precious. They had found peace, not just in the absence of war, but in the deliberate choice to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward. As the students sat in silence, Zorath couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's choice might not just be the answer for them. It might be the answer for the entire galaxy. They had learned the hard way that war could only lead to destruction. But peace was a choice, and that was the most powerful weapon of all. A new path for the galaxy. The next day, the alien students gathered again in the vast, sterile classroom, each one carrying a sense of unease and reflection. The lessons from the past few days had shaken their understanding of what it meant to be a species, to survive, and more importantly, to evolve. Zoreth and his companions still couldn't fully comprehend how the humans had come to such a radical conclusion. But the more they thought about it, the more they began to see how Earth's war-torn history was, in fact, a powerful lesson for the entire galaxy. "I've been thinking," Vera began, her voice softer than usual. "The way humans learned to stop themselves before it was too late. What if our people could learn the same thing?"